video just released shows the arrest of P. Diddy's alleged drug mule, who was taken into custody while trying to board the rapper's private jet.
Put him in the car.
We don't hear a word from Brendan Paul, the alleged drug mule, but he doesn't look too happy when he's put in the backseat of a squad car.
Wow, this is really big. This is really big because you're thinking about this huge mogul. Like everyone knows who Puffy is, who Diddy is, who Puff Daddy is, who Sean Combs is. No matter what his name, you know who he is.
Here's everything we know so far about that alleged drug mule, Brendan Paul, and the P. Diddy case so far.
The question that I will have I'm curious to see what will happen is that whether they're going to use those charges against Brendan to try to flip him, to try to get him to cooperate against any type of prosecution against Puffy or others.
Right off the bat, let's start by saying no criminal charges have been filed against P. Diddy. You know him as that Diddy, Puff Daddy, Puffy, Sean Combs. He's a rapper, record exec, and producer who's been in the spotlight for decades. And while he doesn't have any charges against him right now, they could be on the way. We say that because two of Diddy's homes, one in Holmby Hills in California and the other on Star Island in Miami, have been raided this week by Homeland Security. We sat down with former homicide prosecutor and trial attorney Bernarda Villalona to make sense of all this.
So there's a lot of bombshells that have been dropped recently, and I think the execution of the search warrant is really what's bringing so much attention to it, because we're no longer talking about civil allegations. Now we're talking about a criminal investigation, which is a completely different ballpark.
Bernarda mentioned those civil lawsuits, and there's been a handful. We first reported one in November of last year when Diddy's ex-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura filed suit against him. You probably know her as the singer Cassie. So Cassie filed this lawsuit under New York's Adult Survivors Act. That act meant that between November 2022 and November 2023, sexual assault survivors could file civil suits against their alleged predators, regardless of whether the statute of limitations had passed. Cassie's lawsuit dropped several major bombshells, including her claims that Diddy beat her, that he raped her, and also forced her to have sex with prostitutes while recording it on video. Cassie's lawsuit also alleged that Diddy made her carry a gun, which is a theme we saw in a different civil suit, which we'll get to soon. But first, back to Cassie, who settled with Diddy outside of court just one day after the lawsuit was filed. Also in November of last year, accuser Joy Dickerson-Neal filed a civil suit against Diddy in Manhattan Supreme Court. Now, according to her lawsuit, Diddy videotaped an assault of Joy back in 1991 when she was a student at Syracuse University. Joy says Diddy drugged her, sexually assaulted her, and then passed around this videotape to other people in the music industry. At the time the lawsuit was filed, Diddy's rep called it a money grab. Things were calm for a few months until February of this year when Rodney Jones, known as Lil Rod, filed a lengthy civil suit against Diddy and several others, accusing the singer of sexual assault and dropping some major bombshells.
That entire filing was just gasp-worthy.
That was former prosecutor Melba Pearson, who broke down the filing with us just this week. The suit name-dropped several celebrities, from Jennifer Lopez and Prince Harry to Cuba Gooding Jr., who Lil Rod accused of unwanted sexual touching while on Diddy's yacht.
I'm getting the feeling where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Because now we have two different instances where you're accused of the same type of behavior, years apart. I think there's something there. And I don't know that Cuba Gooding Jr. is going to escape from that one, because he already saw definitely people moving away from him within Hollywood circles and other circles once those first sexual assault allegations came out. So at this point, I don't think he's going to get away with it a second time.
As for J-Lo, the suit claimed that Diddy required her to carry an illegal gun that was used in a 1999 shooting at a New York nightclub. The fact fact that she's named as somebody who was carrying a weapon, could that be incriminating for Jennifer Lopez?
It can be, but with a huge caveat, right? If I'm not mistaken, that shooting did not result in a death. I know that somebody was harmed, but I don't believe anyone was killed. Because of that, you have the statute of limitations to deal with, which is basically a prolonged amount of a certain amount of time that a prosecutor has to be able to bring charges against someone. And it varies from state to state. But the one thing is consistent is that there is no statute of limitations on murder. So if P. Diddy had actually killed this person or the person died as a result of their injuries, now J. Lo could be brought into the mix as a co-defendant because of the fact that the person has passed away. But if the person is alive, and maybe they had serious injuries or whatever the case may be, statute of limitations would run. And it is highly likely at this juncture that statute of limitations have expired. Therefore, she does not have any criminal liability. But the reputational damage might be a different story because now she's branding herself as something very different than who she was back then. Back then, she was very much Jenny from the block. She was, dating a variety of hip hop artists. She was very much in that world. Now she's married to Ben Affleck. She's trying to, portray herself in a different manner. So now her past is going to come back to haunt her. And we don't know what that's going to mean for her future in terms of movie deals, music deals, or anything like that. So I think for her, it might be more reputational damage than criminal liability.
The same can be said for Prince Harry, who was casually mentioned in the lawsuit. His name only comes up once, and it's almost an afterthought. The court doc reads, quote, Mr. Combs was known for throwing the best parties. Affiliation with and or sponsorship of Mr. Combs' sex trafficking parties garnered legitimacy and access to celebrities such as famous athletes, political figures, artists, musicians, and international dignitaries like British Royal Prince Harry. Why even name Prince Harry? There's no allegations against him or anything, but why bring him up?
I think it may have been a move to bring more credibility to the filing and say that, basically he being Diddy, was using his fame, fortune, and influence to insulate himself. So he was able to legitimize some of the activities he was doing by having these lavish parties, bringing all these A-list celebrities, but somewhere in a back room or somewhere in another wing, horrible things were happening. So the fact that Prince Harry was there does not necessarily mean he was participating in what was happening. And just because you were at a party doesn't mean you know what's happening in every inch of the house. I mean, if you think about it, if the party's being thrown in a mansion, there are various floors and wings. So it is completely possible that he was there and did not participate. Now, if you had said Prince Andrew, especially as a result of the allegations that came out in connection with the Epstein case, that they were close and that they traveled together, and there was a person that alleged that he had sexually assaulted her while she was underage, that would be a different story. But Prince Harry and the way that it was mentioned seemed to be very, again, just sort of trying to bring legitimacy and talk about these were the people that Diddy surrounded himself by to protect himself.
In this specific lawsuit, Lil Rod lists more than 10 plaintiffs, but includes additional names, like that of Brendan Paul, who's listed as Diddy's mule, who allegedly, quote, acquires and distributes Mr. Combs' drugs and guns. On Monday, Paul was reportedly arrested at the airport in Miami while trying to board Diddy's private jet. Florida officers were working with Homeland Security and Customs when they found drugs in his bag. These drugs were tested, and the results led to his arrest. He was booked for cocaine and controlled substance possession.
So far, Brendan has only been arrested for possession of a controlled substance, and this is for the narcotics that they recovered, I believe, in one of his bags that was on the airplane where he was stopped in the airport, Miami airport, on Monday. So they haven't linked that to Puffy at all. As of now, it's just for the simple possession, which is still a felony. The question that I will have and would I'm curious to see what will happen is that whether they're going to use those charges against Brendan to try to flip him, to try to get him to cooperate against any type of prosecution against Puffy or others.
All of this means Brendan Paul is facing felonies in Florida and could even face more charges in the future.
I mean, a felony, you can still do jail time. So it's still a serious matter. It's still a serious charge because you can do jail time having to deal with felony possession of narcotics. But just because he just got charged with those two counts, it doesn't mean that in the future he's not going to be charged with several other counts. It all depends where this investigation leads. But again, if I were Puffy, if I were anyone that were associated with Brendan Paul, I would be nervous because it's possible that he can cooperate in order to avoid any jail time and actually sing on other people.
You talked about him flipping or working with prosecutors, investigators, and giving more details. What would all of that look like behind the scenes?
Ooh, well, it's something that we're not supposed to know about, but given that I used to be a prosecutor for 16 years, when it comes to cooperating, well, number one, he has to be willing to cooperate. And that's going to be a conversation between the prosecutors and his attorneys will talk to Brendan to see whether that's an avenue they want to take. I mean, personally, depending on how much exposure he has in terms of jail or how much exposure he has about pending other charges that can come about this entire investigation, it may be a question where he's like, it's not worth it for him to cooperate because he'll be scared of any backlash. He'll be scared of being blacklisted in the industry, and he'll just be scared in general that he'll be known as a person that cooperated against Puffy. But this is a conversation that he needs to have with his attorney, and also for the prosecutors to determine whether they're even willing to offer any type of cooperation deal to Mr. Paul.
Here's what we know about Brendan Paul so far. He's 25 years old and from Ohio. He played guard for Syracuse University's basketball team for 2 years before transferring to Fairmont State University. According to a post on his Facebook, he started making beats on his laptop during the pandemic, which kickstarted his work in the music industry. Eventually, he found Diddy and worked on Diddy's Love album, Off the Grid, that was released last fall. Since his arrest a few days ago, Paul has been released on $2,500 bail. The rest of what we know about Paul comes from Lil Rod's February lawsuit that described him as a direct report of Diddy's chief of staff. That's Christina Quorum, who's also listed as a plaintiff in the lawsuit. As this so-called direct report, Paul would allegedly, quote, be responsible for ensuring payment for sex workers in cash. He also allegedly, quote, directly committed and perpetrated violations of Chapter 77 by aiding, abetting, and inducing the sex trafficking venture and sex trafficking of Plaintiff Jones. So Plaintiff Jones is Lil Rod, who alleges Diddy sexually assaulted him and forced him to have sex with prostitutes. Lil Rod's lawsuit goes on to state that Diddy's associates, including Brendan Paul, would allegedly recruit, entice, coerce, harbor, transport, obtain, and provide Mr. Jones, as well as others, into commercial sex acts through means of force, threats of force, fraud, abusive process, and coercion.
I'm sure that those people that are named in that lawsuit are very nervous right now, very nervous, even more nervous now after the execution of that search warrant, but also nervous because he revealed about these secret recordings, and they're wondering whether they could have been secretly recorded. Are there recordings of them engaging in these type of activities? Because even though it may not be criminal, some of those activities, it still does tarnish their image, so they can still take a toll in terms of their branding. But in terms of the lawsuit itself, it's very damaging. You got to think that several companies have already distanced themselves from Puffy, and there haven't been any criminal charges. All you see is a civil lawsuit. So I think there's still going to be more things that are going to come about as a result of that civil lawsuit. But I think the most damaging, again, is Cassie's lawsuit. But more importantly, I think is Little Rod's lawsuit that was filed.
And in the civil lawsuit, Lil Rod specifically, that Brendan Paul is listed almost 20 times, it's alleged that he's a drug mule. So he's getting different kinds of drugs for P. Diddy. He's also procuring prostitutes or sex workers. So if this is eventually investigated and prosecutors determine that there's enough to charge him, what sort of charges would he face?
Well, what you can see from the civil lawsuit, that is possible that Little Rod would be serving as a witness in any criminal prosecution having to deal with Brendan Paul and him being a drug mule. And where you're talking about him being a drug mule, he is facing significant jail time. First off,